Thank you for joining us today for an interview as part of Touchstone's Pathways to Profession series. Today we are hosting Sharif Bey, a ceramic artist and art educator. Sharif is currently a faculty member at the art department at Syracuse University, which is where I first met him during my undergrad there. Sharif, I'm so happy that you're able to join us today and talk about your career path with us.
It's great to be here, and on behalf of Touchstone, anytime.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. So let's start out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Were the arts a large part of your life growing up, or were there any specific influences or events that inspired you to start creating?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Pittsburgh in a community called Beltsuver on the south side of Pittsburgh, which is actually, if you're in Touchstone, you probably know Pittsburgh a little bit, but the neighborhood I grew up in is pretty much directly on top of the Liberty Tunnels. So the Liberty Tunnels goes through Mount Washington, and on one side is the mountain of Mount Washington, and on the other side is kind of where the south side slopes begin, and it's a neighborhood called Beltsuver. And when I was a kid, city parks, Pittsburgh, had a lot of youth programs, and there were just so many opportunities available for alternative spaces for young people to get together and to be safe and to play basketball and what have you, and join all these different kind of programs, including several arts programs that were supported by places like the Carnegie Museum, the Manchester Craftsmen Guild, Carnegie Mellon University. So there were lots of pre-college programs that had available scholarships and just completely free programs like the Manchester Craftsmen Guild. And hadn't been a art kid, so to speak, in school and been recommended to several of these programs. Once I got into the museum program at the Carnegie, which is like every Saturday, I kind of, my thirst for doing things and working outside of the neighborhood and getting on a bus and going to do art-related things became kind of my regular landscape. So when I joined the Manchester Craftsmen Guild, and they started pushing me to do more and more things, like spending a week and a half or something at Touchstone, or going to a pre-college program in any number of surrounding universities, I was inclined to do that. So one summer I spent maybe, I think 2 weeks at IUP. I spent 2 weeks at Slippery Rock University. I think when I was in 11th grade, I spent 5 weeks at Bennington College. And I remember spending another month in what was then called the Pennsylvania Governor's Schools for the Arts, which was a very competitive program where I think they selected, I want to say, 200 total students out of 2,000 applicants. And then there was another program with Tim Rawlings, which is really well known, KOS. And that was a program that was in conjunction with the Carnegie International, where they, again, I guess what inspired me about these things is I grew up in an arts family, but kind of being involved in these programs that were perceivably prestigious because there were select groups and they were competitive and people sought these groups out. I was lucky in that my portfolio in ceramics continually kind of led to certain doors flinging open, and that went all the way from when I was fourth grade all the way through high school, and then got me a full ride to multiple colleges through my ceramics portfolio.
That's awesome. Not a lot of people have a chance to have the access to all those programs.
Yeah, and specifically, the facility, so I think that, again, I said that I was from an arts family, which meant that, mostly it meant that people drew pictures. And, what was important to me coming from a huge family is once I had a ceramics facility available to me, it became a way of distinguishing myself, but also making something different. I mean, I was the only one making, with the exception of a few people who carved wood, I was like the only one making objects. And also I was exposed to not just visiting artists, but various contexts for exhibiting my work. And from a very young age, and that was pretty much within my family. It was unprecedented to have a show. I think I had my first show in East Liberty when I was 18, and solo show. That was a pretty big deal for a kid.
Yeah, definitely. Did you always know that you wanted to work professionally in the arts, or was it more of an evolution of other studies or goals you had?
Well, I think when I was really young, my idea about what it meant to be successful was predicated on money. So I thought, like, what could I do that might earn me a decent living? These kids like, oh, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor. I think I entertained the idea or the dream when I was, young, that maybe I'll be a dentist. I don't know what it was about dentistry that I had an interest in, but maybe it was just like, pick one, right? Something that'll give me a solid life. And the arts was never really a choice for me, really. It was something that I was always considered to be good at, and it distinguished me. And the thing about that, the title of art being bestowed on you, is really an interesting one, because it's not like a kid, gets a toy chemistry set and has some success and everybody starts saying, oh, you're a chemist. Wow, you're a wonderful chemist. And it's just kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. But in the arts, it is that kind of thing where if you have some measure of success at a young age, suddenly everybody tells you you're an artist. So people have been telling me that I was an artist, pretty much, for my entire life, at least since third grade. So I was, 7 or 8. Oh, he's an artist. He's an artist. He's an artist. So I started doing what I thought artists do, which is hang out at museums and draw pictures and go to exhibitions. And the older I got, the more exposure I got to what artists really did. So by the time I was 15, I was at the Craftsmen Guild, and I got to see, by way of their visiting artist program, so many different journeys of artists. He came from Montana. He was born in New Jersey. He was born in New York City. She came from Vermont. And how their histories of making and leading them to people and places ultimately, led to them having, real, first of all, their own studios. Because, like, what's better than that? Like, nobody's kicking me out. Nobody's telling me I can't fire in the middle of the night or wake up and trim my bowls at 2 a.m. That was, to me, that became my goal. That became what success meant. So by seeing all these early workshops in the 90s from people like Val Cushing and Paul Soldner and June Kaneko, people who are kind of Don Wrights, or kind of iconic in ceramic history now, I would spend, pretty exclusive time with them, because it was primarily high school students and continuing ed folks and some college students. But there would be maybe 20 or 30 of us, spending 3 days with an artist like Paul Soldner, firing or collaborating or working in any number of configurations. But the point that I'm making is, by the time I was 15, I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a ceramic artist. I want to exhibit. I want to have my own shop. And I want to go all over the world talking about how much I love clay. And that's literally what those guys, from my point of view, were doing. And that's what I do today. And I knew when I was 15 that that's exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. Now, of course, art education took me on a different path. And if you had told me when I was in my 20s that I was going to end up with a Ph.D. in art education in my 30s, I would not have believed you. It's just that, life has a way of taking you on different paths and turns. But ultimately, it led right back to what I ultimately wanted to do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the path you've taken through your education and work experiences to where you are now?
Yeah. So regarding it all kind of leads back to the Manchester Craftsmen Guild, because one of the things that I can say is it wasn't my K through 12 school. So the way that it worked, by the time I got a car, of course, when I was 16, I think at some point I even had like a half day, because I finished all my school credits, and I had some sort of like tech job at the Manchester Craftsmen Guild, where I would leave school after my first, I do my classes, and I think by 12:30 or 1 o'clock, I had to work from 1 to 3, for my credits, some sort of experience credits at the Craftsmen Guild. And then from 3 to 5 was the after school program for high school kids. And then from 6 to 9 was the continuing ed for adults. So sometimes there were 4 days of the week where I was at the Manchester Craftsmen Guild from 1 to 9 p.m. working on my portfolio. And I want to say that with regards to establishing a professional identity, that's kind of where it began. So I'd see, again, this kind of demystification of what it means to be an artist. I'd see people building crates and chipping work, and back then we had transparency slides. So you see people changing their slides and sending them off to shows and writing grants and revising artist statements. So I kind of got to see a lot of people were kind of there almost like a postback, where somebody would finish their work at Edinburgh or WVU, and they'd work at the Craftsmen's Guild with hopes of getting into Alfred or Ohio State or one of the bigger programs, and that would be kind of a stop-off point. So the point that I'm making is that one thing kind of led to another. But once I got on that track, I'm going to do what artists do: have shows, work toward this effort. I got a full scholarship to a couple different state schools. And, art schools are different than state schools. So art schools are almost like, oh, we'll give you 80% tuition. And it's like the school costs an astronomical amount. So 80% tuition at Kansas City Art Institute or Chicago Art Institute or the University Arts is still a lot of money. It was a lot of money for me. I think it was like maybe 70% tuition. But I had some full scholarships to small state schools. And I was a homebody and a kid who was not really of the world. And it was a big stretch for me to go off to one of these big colleges and not be connected. So I went to Slippery Rock University, and my professor there, Richard Wukage, was kind of connected to the Craftsmen's Guild in a very profound way, because he had been involved in co-sponsoring the visiting artist workshops and helping Bill Strickland kind of, stabilize that place in some way. And it was almost kind of like, moving away to live with my ceramics uncle, because if we think about the relationships in kind of a familial sense, he was already kind of part of that inner circle of ceramic artists. So going off with him kind of also meant that, people can keep tabs on me, and also meant that because Slippery Rock University was co-sponsoring these exhibitions, it also meant that I could, the exhibitions and visiting artist workshops, that I could still continue to take the workshops and go back to Pittsburgh. And we also got credit for attending the workshops. So by the time I graduated high school, I think I had accrued like 12 credits, 1 credit per workshop. And I had attended, at least a dozen workshops between my freshman year and the end of high school. So Slippery Rock, full tuition. Also, I was well aware that Slippery Rock had then a kind of pioneering exchange international program where they had created relationships, Dick Wukage specifically, created work relationships with schools in the former Czechoslovakia, in Poland and Hungary. And I was kind of sold on that idea, that I wasn't fully blown away by the small state schools art program, but I knew that I can get to Europe and do a semester there for free if I went to Slippery Rock. So that was kind of my ultimate plan. Like, okay, maybe I'm not going to go to a big giant school. I'm going to go to this little school and get what I need in terms of more direct communication and support. But then I could eventually go off to this bigger school in Europe, which is the Academy of Fine Arts and Design in Bratislava. And I went over there initially for a symposium, and I went back, and I think I spent 2 years there, or a year and a half there, between 1994 and 1995. So that started a whole nother trajectory for me in terms of my work and cultural awakening, but it also very much distinguished me as a candidate for graduate school. So it's like, here's my portfolio, but he did this other stuff too, in addition to continually exhibiting throughout his early 20s and early college years. He went over to Europe and made this body of work, and also started to distinguish his practice by also casting bronze and integrating that aspect of his practice back into his ceramics work. So so from that point, I went off to, I think I could only afford to apply to a handful of graduate schools. And I was fortunate to get into only one, the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And I had like I think they sweetened the deal by giving me an assistantship, but also in-state tuition, which was another carrot that made it a lot easier to where basically I was able to, I didn't have a fellowship like some students did where they didn't have to work, but I basically worked for the university, and the tuition cost was so low by way of in-state tuition that it would just basically meant a couple $100s came out of every check to pay for my tuition. And I didn't owe any money by the time I finished grad school. So this was now 6 years of college, no debt. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So so after that, I applied to programs. I applied to tenure track jobs. I didn't have any opportunities. I had two options. I was either going to go to New Jersey. I applied and I got into this, or I had, I didn't get in, but I was a finalist for, it's called Johnson's Atelier. I don't know if it exists in the same form that it did, but basically you would be like you would be trained as like a specialized tech. So if Jeff Koons wanted you to make a, Snoopy that was, 20 feet tall, he could have Johnson's Atelier take it from this size to scale, and this tech team would cast it and fabricate or fabricate it. But I ended up taking the path of least resistance and going back to the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild to teach for a couple years while I planned my transition. And you asked about my educational trajectory. It's kind of a longer story because I think I was in college for like 14 years or 12 years. So, 5 years of undergrad between going off to Europe and all that stuff, 2 years of grad school. And then after teaching at the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild for a couple of years, it was just a really interesting coincidence. I know this is like directed toward younger people, but I want to say that the one of the artists who I met at the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild by way of their visiting artist program, there were a couple people who I stayed in touch with. One being David McDonald, who you know, but there was kind of a roster of people who I had in the Rolodex, and from time to time, depending on the circumstance, I would kind of bump into them. Of course, the NCCA conference, I'd say hello, but like if I were in the neighborhood, maybe my sister lives in Ohio and I'd swing by this facility, or in this case, I had family up at Penn State. So, when I was at Penn State, I would connect with Chris Staley. And circumstances had it that once I went up there and had lunch with him, and he introduced me around, and he connected me with one of his friends and colleagues, Charles Gurarian, who was then the director of the school, but also a very accomplished scholar and teacher in art education. And I was just coincidentally, I just happened to be on campus because my brother wanted to interview for a master's program in geography. And I was teaching at the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, and I had more job flexibility, so I could like flex my hours, and his car was broke down. So I drove him up to State College. And while he was interviewing, I figured I'd just hang out in the ceramic studio and have lunch with Chris. And believe it or not, one thing led to another. And I ended up interviewing for grad school when I was up there and got recruited for their Ph.D. program, had no intention of going back to school, just kind of relationships and networks and circumstances. I was having lunch with Chris, and then I got connected to this man, Charles Gurarian, and I had nothing to lose. We're just sitting there talking about the state of education and what's happening with young people in the schools and what should be happening with young people in the schools. And before I knew it, that fall, I had moved with my wife and two children because life had changed a lot by the time I ended up going back to school to being a fellowship recipient and an art education PhD candidate at Penn State. So I finished there in 2007 and also went back to Europe to study again at the Academy of Fine Arts and Design as a visiting scholar and Fulbright fellow. So altogether, there's 2 years in between, but I was in college from 1992 until 2007, basically.
Yeah, that's a lot of education, but it's all good.
Yeah, a lot of institutions, at one point I had left the university physically. I was still a Ph.D. candidate, but I was teaching ceramics at Penn State. I was teaching drawing at Penn State. And I was thinking to myself, I'm studying and finishing my Ph.D., but I'm busting my butt as a teacher. I was like, I could just as well be doing this and really getting paid for it, because you get paid a whole lot less when you're a graduate student. And I did have my terminal degree in studio art, which was my master's. So I started to apply for jobs for that fall. And I think in the fall of 2005, I left. I think I had 3 interviews and 3 offers. It was pretty great. And I decided to go to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I spent just about 5 years before coming to Syracuse. So that's my entire educational, professional spiel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's see. How were you introduced to Touchstone, and how have organizations like Touchstone shaped your artistic endeavors?
It's pretty great. Like I said, like when I know that, especially now, I feel like, it's just such a different time, and young people are so different. But even for that period, I realized how, when I say exceptional, I'm not talking about exceptional in my abilities or skills. I had an exceptional commitment. I know I was unusual in my drive to be a ceramic artist. So at that point, we had at the Craftsmen, I remember they had one summer program there where they even fed us lunch, and I had my own car, so I can drive, I can eat lunch there. So I don't have to worry about the bus schedule. Like, there was no reason for me to leave until somebody locked the door, literally. So it was like, okay. And then I remember, like, the security guards and everybody, okay, time to wrap up, But Touchstone was really great, because I think the first time I went to Touchstone was in 1990. And we had so I must have been in 10th grade. And we had a workshop there with David McDonald, who we had already met, because David was kind of part of the ceramics family, because he was connected to Slippery Rock and Richard Wookage by way of the Slippery Rock Summer Program, which was an effort to kind of recruit kids of color from Pittsburgh. He was also connected through Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. So David was one of the rock star ceramic artists who were kind of part of this effort to connect these institutions with hopes of increasing diversity. And he was, pretty much the only potter of color that we knew at the time. Bill Strickland and Bill Strickland wasn't really working in clay as much then. He was more like to us, he was like the school principal. He wore a tie, but he had a pottery background. So there was a workshop with David McDonald, and a gang of us went up, and I think it may have been a week but it wasn't a 2-week gig. It may have been a weekend or a week. I don't remember. But we went up, and the beauty of it, just getting back to what I was saying, is there was food. It was unlimited studio access. So there was really no reason to leave. And back then, David used to smoke a corncob pipe, and he had long dreads. So he was just so interesting and distinguished to me. It's just, in his little deep voice, he's, smoking on this pipe, and, we're outside, and of course, he's working his butt off on his own work the whole time too. So he's teaching us, but outside of the official time, we're all just working and drinking coffee and hanging out. So, and then I remember I don't remember if we went, this is a long time ago now, right? So I'm talking like 30 years ago or more. But I think me and the gang kind of, either we tried to go fishing, or I don't even remember if there's a body of water around there. I know
We have a creek on campus.
Okay, so it must have been
fish.
Yeah, I don't know what we did, or I know at one point we kind of like we broke it up a little bit. I don't know if we got some flashlights and everybody was down there to fire, but the point is that there was a lot of room to roam for us city kids and change up the pace. So we had unlimited access, but we also had the teen silliness, and it was like the best of both worlds for us. And it was actually really just a hop, skip, and a jump from Pittsburgh. So it's not like we were, we had to drive so far to have this really unusual experience. Because up to that point, most of the workshops and things that I experienced were in the city or in a university context. So to have a workshop kind of, but also the benefit of being in this kind of isolated rural atmosphere it added something more to that. I think that one of the things that more and more kids deserve is specialness. Maybe if you're a farm girl or farm guy, going to the city is something that's exotic and unique and special. But like for us to have an opportunity to go up there was pretty amazing. And I remember meeting Martin. I wish I knew Martin's name, but he's still affiliated with Touchstone, because I seen him last time I was up there. And he was like, then 30 years ago, I think he was a newly retired ceramic engineer who had gotten his degree at Alfred. And he ended up coming to my show in Pittsburgh years later when I was still in high school, which was a really, again, it made me feel quite special that he would seek me out and respond to the postcard and come to my exhibition. But again, as a high school student, it was also unusual and special to be a part of these communities that were, what we had in common is we all wanted to work in clay. But we're talking about, somebody who's 30, 40 years older than me, working in clay. We have college professors, we have hobbyists, we have art teachers, we have, these kind of retired old people. And it was just a really great community and a great opportunity to learn from such a diverse group from the perspective of a young person. So I always attribute those things to like my real education, because as you know, education is as much social as it is academic.
Mm-hmm.
So learning how to have a conversation with a retired old lady from Squirrel Hill is very, very different than being, perpetually surrounded with your peer group for your entire adolescence.
And my last question is, what words of wisdom or advice would you share with any aspiring artists?
Well, I mean, there's the cliches about like never giving up and this, and the other. I think that one of the things that young people have a challenge with, because now I am, my children are 19, 18, and 15. So I guess I would be speaking pretty much to the group that I'm now trying to guide and nurture. And the one thing that I think is really important that the arts certainly can offer is an opportunity to kind of slow down and be a little bit more self-reliant and intuitive. And I think that that's something that is very fundamental to having a practice that involves making. And when I say that, I'm saying that I think we are so loaded with stimulation at all times that it gets to the point where we can't settle for a gadget that only has one application. It's like what are you doing? I'm doing my homework, but I'm FaceTiming my friend and I'm listening to music and I'm watching Netflix, and then I have my laptop here, and it's just like you're literally like plugged in. And I can't help but to think that even if you feel that this is what it means to be present in this present time, and I know presence means something very different in 2020, I think that in some way or another, you're kind of extending yourself a little bit more. And I think that the benefit of just kind of unplugging, it gives us an opportunity to kind of trust something more fundamental about who we are. And I think we can get to the point where we don't know how to depend on ourselves anymore. It's like we become afraid of silence. And, and even I'll say that I've even had that experience where, I'm somewhere like Green Lakes and I sit down and I have a moment to myself and I instinctually go to check my phone. Oh, well, this is a spare moment. Why don't I use this spare moment to check my email?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I use this spare moment to make sure no one texts me? Why don't I clear out my inbox? And I think that again, we really, it filters out a lot of what I would consider some very genuine and fundamental opportunities to take stock of what's going on around you, and it just breathe. So as far as career advice, the world is changing so rapidly that it's so difficult, for me to even say anything that's not cliche or that's not completely dated. But I think that my advice beyond, get back on the horse or there's another fish in the sea or anything like that is just take some time to unplug and get to know yourself more than you do. And we can all use a little bit more of that.
Yeah, that is definitely great advice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sharif, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to share the path you've been taking as a professional artist. You're such a
well, thank you. And
thank you.
It's been great. And I also say, take advantage of places like Touchstone, because it really is a gem. And if I could say one more thing, Stacy, I think that, one of the things that makes Touchstone special is, and I've talked to several people about this, is that it's Touchstone. And when I say that, I'm saying that there are so many art centers that are trying to brand themselves and run their programming the same way as quote unquote successful programs do. And I think that there are a lot of wonderful regional gems in that area of Pennsylvania. And I love that I can look in the calendar and see that Touchstone isn't looking for the next big thing or trying to only bring in people for their roster. Like I'm teaching at a center, and I'll keep it nameless, but they were like, promise that if you teach at our center, you won't teach anywhere else this summer. Like, because they want the draw. Like they don't want to lose their clientele to another big name institution. And this is all the way in another part of the country, So I love the idea of regional art centers. And, Valda Cox was one of my teachers, forever ago. And I love the idea that there's like a Valda Cox workshop that's been running at Touchstone forever. Thad Mosley's taught at Touchstone for decades. And I love the idea that there's a community there that grows together in the spirit of craft, but also in the spirit of Pennsylvania. So that's my sales pitch to Touchstone.
Oh, thank you so much, Sharif.
All right, take care.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.